There was a time when Ben Jones was best known as a grease-covered mechanic in a little southern town, the kind of man who could crack a joke while repairing a wrecked car for a bunch of good old boys trying to stay one step ahead of the law. But the man behind that familiar television character had a life that was far more complicated and unpredictable than anything a Hollywood writer could have invented. Ben Jones spent years bringing Cooter Davenport to life before leaving Hazzard County behind and taking an extraordinary detour into American politics. When he died on August 9, 2026, his family was left not only grieving the man they loved, but also confronting a financial legacy that was surprisingly modest compared with the enormous cultural footprint he had created. Ben Jones's journey began far from television studios and political offices. He was born on August 30, 1941, in Tarboro, North Carolina, and grew up in Portsmouth, Virginia. His father, Buck, worked for the Atlantic Coast Line Railroad, and the family lived in a small railroad shack near the waterfront. The home had no electricity and no indoor plumbing. Money was tight, and childhood was shaped by long summers spent with very little. For some people, circumstances like those can become a permanent limitation. For Jones, they seemed to create a determination that stayed with him for the rest of his life. His mother, Isla, was the youngest of 13 children and devoted herself to keeping the household together. Meanwhile, young Ben dreamed about what might exist beyond the railroad tracks that surrounded his Portsmouth childhood. Jones graduated from Woodrow Wilson High School in 1959 and eventually enrolled at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. There, he discovered a passion that would alter the course of his life. Once he became involved with the Carolina Playmakers, the university's respected theater organization, performing stopped being simply an interest and became a calling. While attending college, Jones worked in summer stock theater and appeared in the outdoor production Unto These Hills in Cherokee, North Carolina. The historical drama gave him valuable experience performing before live audiences and helped develop the storytelling skills that would eventually serve him on television. After completing his studies at Chapel Hill, Jones moved to Atlanta in 1969. He found opportunities with the Alliance Theater, the Atlanta Children's Theater, and the Theater of the Stars. Over the years, he appeared in more than 100 stage productions. That extensive theater experience gave him a foundation that was much deeper than the brief training many television actors receive. His first major film opportunity arrived in 1975 with Moonrunners, an independent movie about Southern bootleggers. The film was directed by G.Y. Waldron and featured narration from country music star Waylon Jennings. Although the movie was not initially a major commercial success, it would become an important stepping stone because Waldron had another idea in mind. When CBS began developing a television series based on the world of Moonrunners, Jones was among the early actors invited to audition. That opportunity would ultimately introduce him to the character that defined much of his public life. The Dukes of Hazzard premiered on CBS in January 1979, with Jones portraying Cooter Davenport, the mechanic and tow truck operator serving the fictional Hazzard County, Georgia. Cooter was practically built to become a fan favorite. In a town where Bo and Luke Duke seemed to destroy cars on a regular basis, Cooter was the dependable mechanic who was always ready to get them back on the road. Whenever the General Lee needed repairs or the Duke boys needed help, Cooter could usually be found underneath a vehicle with a wrench in his hand. His humor, loyalty, and easygoing personality made him one of the show's most recognizable supporting characters. Jones ultimately appeared in 141 episodes throughout the show's 7 original seasons, which concluded in February 1985. The Dukes of Hazzard became one of the biggest television successes of its era. During the 1979 to 1980 season, it ranked second in the Nielsen ratings, behind only Dallas, which happened to air immediately afterward on CBS Friday nights. Cooter became an especially popular part of that success. His CB radio identity, relaxed personality, and willingness to help the Duke family made him a character audiences remembered long after individual episodes ended. Away from the cameras, however, Jones was dealing with struggles that were considerably less cheerful. He had already been married 3 times before reaching 40 and experienced periods of serious drinking. His personal life was often turbulent, even as his professional career was gaining momentum. Eventually, Jones said he became sober at the age of 36. That decision became one of the most important turning points in his life. Looking back on his recovery, he later captured the experience with a striking sentence, "I got sober the day before I died." His relationship with the Dukes of Hazzard was not always completely smooth, either. During the show's second season, Jones temporarily departed because of a disagreement over whether Cooter should appear with facial hair or remain clean-shaven. While he was away, the production introduced several substitute characters who were loosely presented as Cooter's cousins. The disagreement was eventually settled, Jones returned, and Cooter remained clean-shaven for the remainder of the series. It may have seemed like a minor production dispute, but it revealed something important about Jones. He was willing to stand behind his opinions, even when doing so created conflict. When the Dukes of Hazzard ended in 1985, Jones faced the same problem confronting many actors who become closely identified with one famous role. Audiences often refuse to separate the actor from the character. Instead of spending years trying to escape Cooter's shadow through Hollywood auditions, Jones took a completely unexpected route. He entered politics. Few actors have made a transition from television stardom to national politics as boldly as Ben Jones. By the time the Dukes of Hazzard ended, the show's peak ratings were behind it, but the reruns continued and fans remained loyal. Jones realized that the relationship he had developed with those viewers could translate into something very different from another acting job. In 1986, he made his first run for Congress. He challenged Republican incumbent Pat Swindle for Georgia's 4th Congressional District. Many expected Jones to make a respectable celebrity campaign before returning to entertainment. Instead, he came surprisingly close. Jones received 47% of the vote, narrowly losing the election but demonstrating that his popularity was more than television fame. He had developed a genuine connection with many working-class voters in Georgia. 2 years later, he tried again. This time, the result was dramatically different. In 1988, Jones defeated Swindle with 60% of the vote. On January 3, 1989, Ben Lewis Jones took his seat as a Democratic member of the 101st United States Congress, representing Georgia's 4th District. The man who had spent years playing a small-town Southern mechanic was now officially a member of the United States House of Representatives. In Washington, Jones served on the Committee on Public Works and Transportation and the Committee on Merchant Marine and Fisheries. Those assignments reflected issues closely connected to the practical concerns of his Georgia constituents. He narrowly won re-election in 1990 and began his second term. His political style remained direct and plain-spoken, qualities that had also made Cooter such a recognizable character on television. His congressional career ultimately ended because of redistricting rather than a scandal or dramatic political downfall. After the 1990 census, Georgia's district boundaries were changed, and Jones's home was placed outside the district he had previously represented. He ran in the 1992 Democratic primary in his newly drawn district but lost. After 4 years in Congress, his time in Washington was over. Yet Jones was not finished with politics. In 1994, he challenged Newt Gingrich, who at the time was House Minority Whip and would soon become Speaker of the House. The race was never particularly competitive, but Jones's decision to enter it demonstrated that he was not interested in simply choosing the safest path. After Washington, he returned to something he understood perhaps better than anyone: the lasting appeal of Hazzard County. In 1999, Jones and his wife, Alma Viator, opened Cooter's Place in Sperryville, Virginia. The business combined a museum with a themed store devoted to the Dukes of Hazzard. Fans who had grown up watching the series could walk through the collection, see memorabilia, meet the actor behind Cooter, and purchase merchandise. The idea proved successful enough to expand. Additional Cooter's Place locations eventually appeared in Pigeon Forge and Nashville, Tennessee, as well as Luray, Virginia. Jones also became a major organizer of fan gatherings. One of the most remarkable was Dukes Fest in Nashville in 2006. More than 100,000 fans reportedly attended the event, with the Tennessean describing it as the largest turnout ever recorded for a fan event in the city. The attendance demonstrated just how deeply the Dukes of Hazzard remained embedded in popular culture. Jones had managed to transform his connection to Cooter from a television role into an ongoing relationship with generations of fans. Music became another part of his later career. Jones performed with Cooter's Garage Band at festivals, concerts, and gatherings throughout the country. The group released more than a dozen albums, and in 2020 another recording arrived under the title, Play Me an Old Song. Music gave Jones another way to remain active and connected with audiences. It also allowed him to pursue something he genuinely enjoyed rather than simply relying on nostalgia for his television career. In 2007, Random House published his memoir, Redneck Boy in the Promised Land, The Confessions of Crazy Cooter. The book explored much more than his years on the Dukes of Hazzard. Jones wrote about growing up in the railroad shacks of Portsmouth, his struggle with alcoholism, his unexpected rise to television fame, and his even more surprising journey into Congress. The memoir was unusually candid. Jones discussed parts of his life that many celebrity autobiographies would probably have avoided. He also wrote about participating in civil rights sit-ins during the 1960s, providing a much more complicated picture of the man behind the fictional Southern mechanic. By this stage, it was clear that Jones had built a life that could not be reduced to Cooter Davenport. The character had made him famous, but everything that followed showed that there was considerably more to him. On August 9, 2026, Jones was at his home in Washington, Virginia, preparing to watch an Atlanta Braves game against the New York Yankees. He never saw the game begin. According to his wife, Alma Viator, Jones suffered a massive heart attack while sitting in his favorite chair waiting for the game to start. News of his death spread quickly, followed by tributes from people who had known him throughout his unusual career. Tom Wopat, who played Luke Duke throughout all 7 seasons of the Dukes of Hazzard, remembered Jones as a good friend and a passionate advocate. He also referred to the loss as the passing of a Duke cousin. Viator's own words about her husband were deeply emotional. She described him as having lived an amazing, rich, and full life, emphasizing how deeply he had been loved and how much he would be missed. Jones left behind his 5th wife, Alma Viator, whom he married on October 10, 1992. He was also survived by his children, Rachel, from his marriage to Mary Alice Beale, Jean, and Walker, who was born in 1983 during his marriage to Vivian Walker Jones. Through his marriage to Viator, Jones was also a stepfather to 3 other children. Then attention turned to his estate. The financial figures associated with Ben Jones's name were surprisingly small compared with the fame he had accumulated over several decades. Celebrity Net Worth had previously estimated his fortune at approximately $500,000. That estimate reflected the financial realities of a career that moved between character acting, politics, music, and small business rather than the much more lucrative world of Hollywood leading men. Even a successful television actor does not necessarily become wealthy on the scale of a show's biggest stars. Congressional pay during Jones's years in office was also modest compared with modern celebrity fortunes. Other estimates placed his wealth considerably higher, at around $2 million. Those calculations attempted to account for the value of the Cooter's Place brand, property connected to the farm and log cabin Jones and Viator purchased in Rappahannock County, Virginia, in 1998, as well as various business interests associated with merchandise and Dukes Fest. IB Times reported an estimate of roughly $2 million at the time of his death, although the actual value of an estate can vary significantly depending on how private businesses, real estate, and other assets are calculated. Whatever the final figure, it was far removed from the kind of fortune many people might imagine when they hear about a television star who remained famous for nearly half a century. That contrast was particularly striking for those closest to Jones. His life had been enormous in terms of experiences. He had acted on stage and television, entered Congress, operated businesses, performed music, written a memoir, and maintained a devoted fan base well into his 80s. Yet the financial estate left behind was comparatively modest. For his family, that reality carried an emotional weight that went beyond money. The numbers represented the complicated financial journey of a man whose life had been full of ambition, setbacks, recovery, reinvention, and hard work. Jones had already acknowledged many of those struggles in his memoir. His early marriages, periods of heavy drinking, and the unpredictable nature of an actor's income had created financial instability. When he finally became sober and began making more deliberate choices, he was already working to rebuild a life that had suffered years of uncertainty. Cooter's Place eventually became his most sustained business success. But it arrived later in his life, after decades spent navigating different careers and personal challenges. His congressional papers now reside at the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. The collection fills approximately 78 cubic feet and documents not only his time in Congress but also the remarkable story of an entertainer who entered public service without the financial security that often accompanies political careers. And there were things no estate statement could ever measure. The Dukes of Hazzard continued to live through syndication around the world. The Cooter's Place businesses became physical reminders of his most famous role. And millions of viewers retained memories of Cooter Davenport, the fictional mechanic who always seemed ready to help when the Duke boys needed him. That cultural legacy was worth far more than a number on a balance sheet. Very few people manage to establish themselves in one profession and then build an entirely different career of real significance. Ben Jones accomplished that transition more than once. He became a recognizable television actor, served in Congress, built a successful fan-oriented business, recorded numerous albums, and published a memoir that exposed parts of his life most celebrities would have kept private. The Dukes of Hazzard gave Jones the opportunity most actors dream about, a character that audiences genuinely loved. Cooter Davenport was not the central hero, the romantic lead, or the person around whom every storyline revolved. He was the mechanic. He was the guy who kept the vehicles running, appeared whenever someone needed help, and usually managed to make the situation a little more entertaining. That kind of supporting character can easily disappear into the background. Jones prevented that from happening by giving Cooter a distinct personality and a warmth that made him memorable. When the series ended, Jones's decision to enter politics revealed another side of his personality. Instead of spending years attempting to distance himself from his television identity, he recognized that the connection he had built with viewers could be useful in another arena. His popularity gave him an unusual level of access to working-class communities, especially across the South. His own childhood had been marked by poverty, and he understood firsthand what it meant to live without much financial security. To many Georgia voters, that background made his political message feel more authentic than the carefully manufactured connection often seen in celebrity campaigns. Even his 1994 challenge to Newt Gingrich reflected his willingness to pursue a cause despite the odds. By then, a congressional comeback was unlikely. But Jones entered the race anyway, demonstrating that winning was not always the only reason he was willing to fight. His memoir provided perhaps the clearest picture of the person behind the public image. Rather than producing a polished collection of Hollywood stories, Jones confronted the more difficult parts of his past. He wrote frankly about alcoholism and the danger it had posed to his life. He discussed his failed marriages without attempting to make himself look perfect. He also described his involvement in the civil rights movement and the risks he faced as a young white Southerner participating in sit-ins during the 1960s. That honesty made the book different from the typical celebrity autobiography. Jones was willing to acknowledge his contradictions instead of pretending they did not exist. Music remained another constant throughout his later years. His work with Cooter's Garage Band, the albums they released, and the performances they gave across the country kept him connected with audiences who had followed him since the Dukes of Hazzard. Performing was not simply a way to capitalize on old fame. It gave Jones an opportunity to continue doing something he enjoyed while maintaining a direct relationship with the people who had supported him for decades. The Cooter's Place Museums may ultimately prove to be one of his most tangible legacies. Together with Alma Viator, Jones built the businesses around the enthusiasm of the fans themselves. They were not simply corporate celebrity attractions. They were personal projects created by people who understood how much the Dukes of Hazzard meant to its audience. The scale of Dukes Fest illustrated that connection. When more than 100,000 people gathered in Nashville in 2006, the event demonstrated that the show's cultural influence had extended far beyond its original television run. By the time Jones died, his story had become much larger than the role that first made him famous. On that Sunday in August 2026, while an Atlanta Braves game was about to begin, Ben Jones's extraordinary journey came to an end. He had traveled from a childhood in railroad housing and financial hardship to television fame, political office, entrepreneurship, music, and eventually a place in American popular culture that few performers ever achieve. His family was left with grief, memories, and an estate that was smaller than many people would have expected from someone so recognizable. But money was never the only measure of what Ben Jones accomplished. His legacy existed in the 141 episodes of the Dukes of Hazzard in which he brought Cooter Davenport to life. It existed in the 4 years he spent representing Georgia in Congress. It lived in the fans who visited Cooter's Place, attended his events, listened to his music, and shook his hand.